Hi and welcome to the FinancialFox. Today we will be discussing quantum computing with a panel of well-known technology experts. In today's world, we turn to the internet for almost any question that pops into our heads. The World Wide Web is great for that, but it is just really a set of interconnected supercomputers and servers. There are other more complex challenges that today's system will never be able to solve because they require more computational power than what we currently have. This is where quantum computing comes in. But what is quantum computing? To clarify this, the first guest to join us is Xuereb, quantum professor at the University of Malta. Hi Andre, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
What exactly is quantum computing and how does it differ from classical computing?
So quantum computing is one of a family of quantum technologies, so there are others as well. The universe allows small things, or what we call qubits as well, to be in two places at the same time, or to have two different states at the same time. And this allows us to build a computer whose memories and whose processing elements are in different states at the same time. They're both 1 and 0 at the same time. And this makes possible certain speed ups in certain algorithms. So for example, something like factoring a number. So if I gave you the number 15, you can immediately tell me it's 3 times 5, but large numbers are very difficult to factor. This sort of problem can be solved exponentially faster on a quantum computer than it could be done on a classical computer. So by allowing things to be in two states at the same time, we can open up the space of problems that can be solved efficiently.
What are the main challenges for quantum development right now?
Okay, so one of the things that sets apart classical computers from quantum computer is noise. So quantum computers tend to be noisy by nature, but also it is very, very, very hard to control the individual variations of the different qubits and the couplings between them and everything else. And this makes it an enormous engineering challenge to produce computers with many qubits. And it makes it a very, very large engineering challenge to control all these qubits to the right level of detail. And what this means is that it's very, very hard to go large, basically. So it's very hard to imagine a quantum computer having more than 100 or even 1,000 qubits.
Obviously, this is one of the conditions for quantum to work, is basically to have a temperature that is almost like 0. How this could be achieved on a larger scale, for example?
What people are working towards is basically having all the necessary components in a small enough footprint that you can put inside what we call a dilution refrigerator, which takes everything down to very, very close to absolute 0. Then having those components, the quantum bit, so to speak, inside that refrigerator in a special data center, and then one would speak to that machine via the internet, or even eventually a quantum internet, so adding new capabilities to the internet, and therefore isolate the bits which need to be kept cold, which can be very small in physical size, from the user, and having something like a quantum computer in the cloud.
Right, it sounds a little bit complicated.
Well, it is, but there's many very smart people working on it, so it's something which is moving along much faster than anyone would have expected, let's say, a couple of years ago.
Also, there is, I think, the question about stability. So somebody talks about the coherence, so which means keeping larger number of qubits stable for longer period of time. How this can be overcome?
So basically, the coherence comes about when something talks to your quantum computer when it shouldn't be. So the quantum computer has to be completely isolated from the outside world between the first stage of the calculation and the last stage of the calculation. If for some reason something talks to your quantum computer, and this could be electrical noise, it could be some connections which you haven't thought about, this causes decoherence and basically causes the calculation to collapse. It robs the computer of its exponential power. It robs the computer of its quantum properties and everything else. It's an engineering problem, so the only way to solve this is to make qubits which are better, isolate them better from your surroundings, put them at colder temperatures, and really just fine-tune every bit of the machine.
So do you think that eventually this quantum computing technology will be made portable, like a personal computer?
It's a very good philosophical question. So in my opinion, not in the next couple of decades. So in the next couple of decades, what we're likely to see is a quantum co-processor. So we have a data center with supercomputers, which offloads difficult calculations to a quantum coprocessor, and that quantum coprocessor lives in the cloud, as I said. Shall we see quantum computers on our wristwatches and phones? Maybe in 30 or 40 years' time. I think that's a bit too far ahead for me to see.
Andre, you held a panel at the workshop on quantum at the Malta AI conference. Do you want to give us the highlights of your presentation?
Yes. So basically, I gave a short presentation where I talked about a couple of different things. So first of all, we wanted to look at what the intersection is between technologies like quantum and other technologies like artificial intelligence and distributed ledger technologies or blockchain. And one of the key messages which I drew out is that in some sense the quantum technologies present, and quantum computers specifically, present us with a bit of a challenge, a bit of a threat, because they will make it possible to break encryption algorithms. So all of our cybersecurity pretty much becomes obsolete. And this also holds for many of the blockchains that are currently in existence. So many of those blockchains whose public-private key algorithms rely on things like RSA and so on, these blockchains are likely to be broken by quantum computers. It's very hard to say when, but definitely for me in the next decade, and that would make it that's going to be a very, very big problem. There is also a second attack, which means that quantum computers can also make mining much easier, which is a completely different kind of attack, and it would make some blockchains also obsolete.
Okay, that's very interesting. And also one possible way to utilizing quantum computing at the moment is to combine it with the classical computer in somewhat like an hybrid settings. How this will be feasible?
There's actually one or two working examples. They're prototypes, but they're already there. And the idea is to divide your calculation into two bits. There's an easy bit and a hard bit. The hard bit turns out to be easy for quantum computers, but it's hard for ordinary computers. So what you do is you send your calculation to your supercomputer. It divides it into two bits, computes the bit which it finds easy, then offloads the rest to the quantum computer, gets that to be solved in a short time, and then gets the result and sends it back to the user. This is exactly what our computers all do. When we're playing a video game, the CPU offloads the difficult bit to the GPU, and that's what renders all the graphics on screen. So it's very much the same thing, except we're dividing a different problem, which can be solved much easier with quantum computers than classical computers.
Let's now welcome our other guests to dig deeper into quantum positive, negatives, and potential effects on blockchain and related applications such as cryptocurrencies. Joining us today is Jean-Phillippe Baudet, Director and Chief Technology Officer at Zio Crypto Networks, and Frank Dumas, entrepreneur, founder, and CEO of Zio Crypto Networks. So Frank, I want to ask you a question. The number of patent applications in the field of quantum computing has started to accelerate. So we saw big tech companies such as Google, Intel, and IBM are investing millions of dollars in its development. How Zio is approaching quantum computing? I mean, is that an area the company is looking into?
Well, it's really, yes, we do, up to a certain point. There's some principles that are theories around quantum computing that are interesting for what we're doing, especially for encryption. But we don't see this as a threat. Like we don't see quantum computer as even an issue for next 15, maybe 20 or 30 years from now. With what we're doing, there's already post-quantum algorithm for encryptions and for private keys that are available, that are working, that are certified, and they'll, every quarter, every year, you see more being added to it. I know that Google, pretty aware of what Google has done in the field of post-quantum algorithm for encryption, and I'm not too concerned at this point. I think it's going to come, but in relation to blockchain protocol, probably the one that will have to look into it and act on it are the people with legacy public blockchain protocol. But they have maybe 10, 15, 20 years in front of them, the whole community to adjust. And they've known forever that every blockchain protocol is a work in progress. So it's just it's like a software upgrade. So we're not dealing with a catastrophic event in front of us. Yeah. Actually, it's probably even a good thing. Like if we can actually harness the power of quantum computing, or just the concepts behind it, we can actually do pretty significant things in our own applications.
We don't see quantum computing bringing the end of the blockchain era, but actually finding way to work together for a better encryption and better application, particularly in the cybersecurity,
But if you look at encryption, for the longest time, the legacy computers, and even before that, if you go back to the Second World War and the work done mostly by militaries back then or intelligence services, they've tend to complexify the process. Like they were trying to get a level of security, of confidentiality, by increasing the steps and complexifying the steps to decode code and decode or encode the message or the communication or the files that they were trying to protect. And maybe now, because quantum computing comes in and the accumulation of simple tasks, it's not going to be a very difficult thing to decrypt for a quantum computer. Quantum computer will be very good at doing massive amount of simple algorithm or simple task. So we have to go back to a simpler way of protecting files and communication. So we'll have to be a bit imaginative, and I see it more as a very interesting challenge for encryption, more than a problematic for blockchain protocols.
Yeah, that's a good point. But I mean, all the present internet banking, government, global equities, capital markets, they all rely on cryptography. So it's not just about blockchain encryption.
Definitely, right now, a lot of the encryption used for certain blockchain protocol, it's all public, or they're using public key, and these public key will not hold their ground vis-a-vis a quantum computer. Same thing for the standard public key for the internet or banking, or most banks right now, at least the online transaction you do, are not on the user interface. They're not using ion encryption. They're using basic 120 bits public keys, and these keys are gone. Like the minute that we have a serious quantum computer deployed, because that we're not there yet. It's still experimental, but the minute that we have one, you have to assume that all these keys and all these services have been compromised. But the solution is very simple. It's to upgrade it to something like a 256 bits encryption key, or make use of algorithms that are post-quantum secure.
In answer to Frank's point, I'd just like to add two things. So first of all, when we're talking about increasing the key size from 128 bits to more than that, we have to keep in mind that every time we increase the key size, there's overheads, there's physical infrastructure, there's software that needs to be upgraded, and so on. But at the same time, it's also a cat and mouse game. So with the new generation of quantum computers, we would need to increase our key size. New generation comes out, key size needs to be increased, and so on. And if this happens every couple of years, then again, it's going to be very costly, very hard. The other part of it is there's a lot of research going on in post-quantum algorithms, but to the best of my knowledge, none of them is actually certified mathematically to be bulletproof, known to be resistant to any quantum computer. So what we have right now are algorithms which we think cannot be attacked by quantum computers, but not which we know. So again, in the future, someone might be able to crack them using quantum computers. So we have to keep that in mind as well. And now the implications this has are quite wide. So when it comes to blockchain, then when it comes to decentralized public ledgers, how are we going to force everyone to switch over to a new code base, which makes use of algorithms which we know are safe? So this is a big problem. With respect to legacy systems and other things like banks, like encrypted file systems, and so on and so forth, the issue there is that one can store encrypted information for 10, 15 years and then crack it open using a quantum computer. So it is important not just to say we have quantum computers probably coming online in the next 10 years, so I'll deal with them in 10 years' time, but the data which we're working with today, the information which we're sending today, must also be safeguarded against computers which will be in action in 10 years or 15 years' time. So this is also something which we might want to keep in mind going forward.
Okay, that's a really good point. JP, it's great to have you on as well.
Pleasure to be here.
So you have been working on protocols, encryption, blockchain, and data security for quite a long time. How might quantum computing affect the present blockchain status quo?
Well, I think it was very well summed up by Andre. Let's say that everything that is going through SSL right now has been stored, either by government or other type of actor. It's only a matter of time before everyone tried to break it. So the big menace, the big threat we are talking about is the guess we have that the data we are exposing today, let's say our banking information or private information or identity information in the government, is already collected, and at one point we know that it will be cracked, and what they are hoping is that it will still be valuable at that time. Let's say that there's some data in your life that are very persistent, such as passport, KYC, identity, and social insurance number. So even if they get it for 15 years, there's a quite valuable chance it will still be used. So when we're speaking about quantum computer and blockchain, the easy answer would be blockchain is no more unless we find a quantum proof way of communicating, which comes back to the problem that Andre summed up very, very well, which is if you go into the race of saying, okay, I'm going to make it more complicated. So let's say that mathematically we know for now the approximate number of possibilities you need to guess to break an SSL. It's awesomely big. But then let's say we have a quantum computer that is able to crack it, and we say, okay, we're going to double it. Yeah, okay, I understand that this is what we call a cat and mouse game. It's who's going to be the faster? Is it going to be the quantum computer, or is it going to be your ability to change the infrastructure? So I think that if we are speaking about quantum, we need to go out of the box. We need to get out of this legacy thinking of making more complex. What we need is true randomness. What we need is something that cannot be guessed by pure brute force. So what you need to do is you need to augment the probability up to a level that is almost impossible to guess.
We were discussing in Malta about the fact that blockchain is linear and quantum is not. And this is something that I would like you to explain, because I'm sure that not everybody understands that. And so that's why they can't, in a way, compete, because they are very different.
Point is, if you speak about quantum has 3 states instead of 2 states. You just technically exponentially grow the number of calculation it can do with the same state. So the problem with quantum computer actually is they are made of hardware and they're very specialized into doing one type of calculation at a time. This is a problem. The quality of that is the guess that I think everyone can have is that the goal of quantum supremacy for now is to break SSL, because this is how you can prove that you just changed the game. The point is it because it is non-linear that it will break SSL? No, it is a pure mathematical component of it can create more guess at a second than any other things. It could do 10,000 years of guess in a few seconds, and it could go on and go on forever. So it's a very simple concept to understand. It's a concept of brute force. If you would have 1,000,000 years to guess every day of your life, you would eventually find it. this is exactly what happens there. So I think that again, it comes back to the way to beat quantum computer is to beat probability. It's to get out of a probabilistic mode that can ever be calculated. Even if you find an answer, which is amusing because I like the point you made, Andre, is even if you find an answer, you'll need to guess that no one's going to break your answer in 5 to 10 years from now. So this quantum threat thing is not there to go away. I think we're going to talk about it for quite a few years. But I know for a fact that at least 5 good actors in the industry, and probably 10 more, are already working on some solution that really looks viable. It's going to be, I think that what's going to win then going to come back to very, very simplistic market laws, as Andre said, is who's going to have the less overhead to be able to be installed into people, and which one will would have the most distribution and be understood more, or maybe be more open source. I don't know. I don't have the exact answer, but I think that the fight is there at this point.
Can we discuss a little bit of the benefit that quantum computing can bring to today's world? So application of quantum computing, maybe in the field of cybersecurity that was mentioned earlier by Andre, and artificial intelligence, for example, that you mentioned earlier, and also Frank mentioned.
Well, in security, there's a lot of benefit. I mean, apart from the fact that we can compute huge things that you would compute in a million years, let's say apart from this benefit, which is more obvious, there's other part to the quantum things that are very interesting for security, such as there has been work for people to be able to see how can we imprison a photon that would be so unique that anyone who would observe or be able to observe this photon would change its very nature, rendering it completely useless, making a type of, let's say, money or digital file that will be uncrackable, because if someone is able to assess its state will change. So everyone has the benefit to not assess the state. So this is some type of work that has been done. I'm just giving you an example of reasoning that has been created by people to how we can tackle security with some quantum state that are very, very unique, such as the observer phenomenon. So I think that at one point it will be possible for people to play with the quantum state, being able to recognize if someone have access, if someone have seen, and even possibly the source of how it has been seen. So we are not there yet, but once we would have the capacity to create artificial intelligence able to interpret the quantum observer state change into a photon, let's say, then we come to a new form of identity that is not even almost thought of now, that will be directly by the light and the fact of observing the light. So as you can see, we barely scratch the surface of what quantum can bring out to security. And then if we speak about artificial intelligence, then we speak about computing power. We speak about the ability for a machine to interpret maybe as much or more data than our own brain is able to deal with. We don't really understand how we think yet. So even if we would have the best machine in the world, there's a lot of work to be done before we go to general artificial intelligence. But I think it's a fair guess to say that general artificial intelligence will happen within the quantum realm, meaning that only quantum computer will have the ability of processing such an amount of data.
Thanks. Frank, do you have anything to add on this point?
Well, I'm looking at encryption and how we can, I like the concept of the cat and the mouse. I'll apply some quantum dynamic to it. Imagine that cat being in a box and being dead or alive. So that's the beauty of the quantum physics, that there's certain concepts or certain basis to quantum physics that we can actually apply to encryption, to the field of encryption and security. And using the same concept, that's probably how we're going to figure out how to get stronger security, stronger encryption. And again, we'll never know until we know if it's bulletproof or not. But we can definitely try at it right away. There's certain other element that I think I want to go back to what JP was saying, and it's something that we're working on internally also. So I'm going to preach from my parish, I would say, is that we've since the Second World War, we've been looking at this by complexifying the questions or increasing the security at the gatekeeper, and not necessarily looking at a simpler solution that could be outside that linear approach. Another element is a lot of the encryption people will assume that unless you thwart 100% of every attack or every attempt at decrypting a file or intercepting a communication, you fail. Well, with quantum computer, we can probably trick a lot of the attack by letting some of them come in and handling them in a different manner, instead of looking at this as a go no go or a gatekeeper type of approach. And the other element also that I want to probably underline of what JP was saying is that certain information that are stored right now will be relevant in 15 years, but some information that can be decrypted, maybe in 6 months with a quantum computer, won't be relevant 5 minutes later. So that's a lot of communication right now that become irrelevant after a few hours, a few days. And if we're able to protect that, that's already the bulk of the communication, and it's the bulk of the value also that's being exchanged in the world. So I think it's important that we worked to be able to sustain attack on the algorithms, like to have algorithms that we at least think that are going to work, even if we cannot prove it. Again, we're going back to Schrödinger cats. Is it dead? Is it alive? But ideally, we try to have something that can sustain attack for the next 30 to 50 years, assuming that quantum computers will be there at that time.
Yeah, well, this is a very interesting point also, because the main progress in quantum computing development has been driven by university and government funding, actually, particularly in the US and China, which is much more stronger actually than the private funding right now. Different, for example, from what is happening in the blockchain space.
Yes, I mean, basically, one of the big reasons for that is the amount of investment involved is very, 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 very large. And it's only recently that the horizon for getting the money back, so to speak, by creating a product which will be useful, it's only very recently that horizon has shrunk enough for private companies to find it attractive. So, it's only recently that Google, a few years ago, Google bought out basically a lab from the University of Santa Barbara, and Microsoft set up a lab in the Netherlands, and so on and so forth. So before that, the amount of money involved in getting into quantum computing was basically prohibitive for anything but a government. And the payback was 10, 20, 30, 40 years in the future. So this shift happened only very, very recently. Whereas with blockchain and other solutions, of course, then the horizons are very different. The orders of magnitude of money involved are very different, and the payback is potentially much quicker. So that's part of it. Just to circle back on the cybersecurity, just to finish this discussion, if I may. One of the things which we're working on, I mentioned this, is something called the quantum internet. So the idea is to have eventually the possibility to exchange quantum information from anywhere in the world to anywhere else in the world in a way that can be certified, that it cannot be observed, as JP was saying, but also allows us to make use of something called, for example, blind cloud quantum computing. Yeah. And that is where I send some data to my quantum computer, send the algorithm to the quantum computer. Both of these are encrypted in a way that the quantum computer cannot even decrypt them, and I can only decrypt them once the information comes back, once the output comes back. So the computer performs a calculation, and the computer itself does not know what calculation it performed and what data it was operating on. So this is something which will be a complete game changer when it comes to companies using cloud computing for sensitive information.
When do you think, Andre, we are going to see, we are going to see quantum computing becoming mainstream, so more implementation?
Okay, so in my estimation, 5 years before we start seeing some quantum computers going online, which can be useful for certain things, 10 years for the first applications, 15 for everything else. This is my personal timeline.
Frank, do you have any forecasts?
I hate timeline and forecast because you never know. You know, you look at the leader in the field. I can have a general idea where they should be and where they're going to be, but there's always some rogue player, or there's always somebody that could do, pun intended, a quantum leap in the science, and then will change everyone's card. So I would say that we have to start to work on it right now. We definitely have to take this seriously. It will definitely have an impact in our lifetime, and I mean, still in the next 10, 15, 20 years, this is going to be something for which we're going to have a intervention protocol when you structure application or when you deploy computer networks.
I mean, these for obviously for ZEU crypto networks, it will be quite relevant because I mean, this is what you are basically developing. You are developing protocols. So whenever you will see there is a use case, an application, you will probably be at the forefront of the best technology to implement. And part.
Well, I'll give you an example. One interesting thing, or two interesting things that quantum computer can do in theory. One is machine learning. So because it's a massive amount of statistical data often, or data point that it can process very quickly and move the bar forward very quickly. The other thing is cleaning up computer codes. So you could have a massive amount of coders, and you could also use machine learning to do some of the code, especially the repetitive stuff, and you could advance things very quickly. Right now in ZEU Crypto, we're actually working on a quantum proof algorithm for encryption that we want to have in our communication protocol. But I would definitely love to have access to a quantum computer just to deal with the debugging of that code. So that's, you know, that as much as it's a threat, the quantum computer will also be used by us to counteract on that threat.
Okay, that's really interesting. So just to wrap it up, I mean, you are building a company that is basically working on a groundbreaking project, groundbreaking solution. How do you see ZEU Crypto Network evolving over years, evolving in the future?
It's actually very difficult to know. And the reason for that is that the field is very young. Way to monetize the field are also slowly evolving right now. Actually, we're starting to see where we should be going. And then there's adoption. Until you have your mother and your father, operating every day on a blockchain application, we're not going to know how we're going to really monetize and how everybody's going to be able to monetize the blockchain and blockchain related technologies. So I would say at this point, and it's really the approach of the company is to work on certain things that we know we can monetize quickly and keep everything else very open so that we don't paint ourselves in a corner. So that, to quote another quantum image, not to be the dead cat in the box.
Maybe between you and JP, you could go through maybe the recent application and the recent news that has been released by ZEU. I mean, the email, and then we have the gambling and gaming, and then looking at esports. Would you like maybe to add something on the exciting journey that ZEU is doing actually, because in just 6-8 months you have achieved so much.
We've done a few good things. There's additional patents coming. There's still development being done, and it's an ecosystem also. So it's a team effort. It's an ecosystem with partner companies. So we're moving, and we're getting lifted by others, and we're lifting others with us.
The main advancement in these days has been done on the Moolah side, and so it comes back a bit to the last interview we had. So one interesting thing about Moolah is it's much more than a blockchain email. Blockchain email is maybe we could say the simplified way of explaining it. As a matter of fact, it's a new way to interact within a distributed communication in which people owns their keys. But we go a step further than that because we're already working, as Frank mentioned, on preparing us for the quantum menace, we could say. But preparing yourself for the quantum menace is not only a quantum thing; it's also a way to create an encryption that is pretty much more solid. So the interesting thing is we have worked on different aspects of it. On the security level of how we communicate data, but also on the security level of how we store data. So how can you create this distributed blockchain email without storing all your data on the blockchain? Because it's super nice to have your immutability of data, but it is not necessarily a case you want. So we have been working on a hybrid approach in which you can use distributed consensus with the ability of deleting. So these are, it might seem stupid, but it is a complicated matter, as a matter of fact. So I will not come with a big tech plan on you right now, but we have made a very significant leap forward by creating an infrastructure in which you can use distributed consensus to store data that can be secure, almost immutable, but still deletable. This will create a situation in which everyone can choose to have their email almost immutable, but the day they want to erase it, they are erased. If someone still wants to make them immutable, let's say you're a public organization, then it can be done on a public ledger, but it is absolutely not suggested. It is first not scalable, and secondarily not legal for the GDPR compliance, and thirdly not very performing. So there's a better way to do it.
Okay, JP, thanks for that. And advise people to check out Moolah and follow Zio Crypto Networks on social media as well, where you can find on.
Also maybe I could add, I know that there was a lot of question either on Twitter and all of this about the reward, and so let's just give another part of the candy. So the point is, one thing that is for sure about the Moolah reward is it's not a type of you will receive a gift or you will receive a rebate on that thing. It's really about people getting a real project that they really want into their own wish list into a really private way. And so this is kind of choose the gift you want. As long as you use us, you will start receiving the gift you will really want to have. This will be my candy for today.
Okay, that sounds really interesting. Look forward to see how you're going to implement these rewards. Okay, wonderful. So I just want to thank you everybody for the great insightful discussion, and I hope that that has been quite useful for all the people watching as well. So thank you very much, guys.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
It's a pleasure, like every time. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thank you. I'll see you next time.
Thank you so much, guys. This was certainly an insightful discussion, and I hope this has helped clear up any doubt for people watching as well. If you have any question, please do get in touch with us in the comment section of the video, on our website, or on Twitter. Send us a DM, because this is a very interesting subject. Quantum computing is not easy, but it's here, it's going to develop, and it's actually going to change many things actually in the internet area, in the way we do things, in the way that everything is going to happen. And it's very interesting to follow step by step how things progress and develop. And we are here to help and get you the answer that you need. So please subscribe to our YouTube channel and stay in touch with us. And thank you so much for watching.